The Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. This is the Financial Survival Network.
Financial Survival Network is presented to you by Regal Assets. Buy and sell physical gold and silver through your existing retirement plan, 100% tax-free with Regal Assets. If you want to include physical gold or silver in your existing IRA or old 401k, request your free investment kit, which was recently featured in the Forbes and Smart Money Wall Street Journal magazines. Call toll-free 855-678-6620, 855-678-6620, or visit regalassets.com. A lot of people are wondering, is September of 2012 going to be a repeat of September of 2008, or could it be even worse? Well, Francis Cianfrocca writes a lot about this. He's been thinking a lot about it, and he's here now to discuss it. Hey, Francis, how you doing?
Just fine, Kerry. Thanks for having me back. Great to be with you.
Hey, it's good to have you back, too. So we're talking bad things always seem to happen in the fall, don't they?
Yes, and I think that specifically with regard to financial markets, financial crises, financial panics, go back in history, and it's a fascinating study. But you're right, they do tend to happen in the fall. And in history, if you go back and look at financial patterns of how capital gets deployed, there's an interaction with agriculture because for centuries, what would happen in the United States, well, let's call it more than a century, all right? You would have farmers in the Midwest, and growing food, of course, is the primary activity of any economy, right? That's what you got to do is feed people. And farmers would borrow money in the springtime, and where was the money? It was in New York. So what would happen is you would go through the summer, and money would have left New York, going to buy farm equipment and seed and other things, literally getting put in the ground, okay? And the harvest comes in September and October. And if there are problems, that's when they show because people's money is out and everyone is illiquid. Okay? So if you get a crisis like the famous Knickerbocker crisis of October 1907, right, the stresses in the system will tend to appear at those times. And of course, after the harvest is in, then everybody's liquid again, and you go back to sleep for the winter. How that plays out these days, I think it's less, the impact of agriculture on our financial system is less, but you still definitely do see the September effect. I can remember the days of 2008 like they were yesterday, and August of 2008 was a very funky month. Of course, August of 2007 was when the crisis really started.
Sure. With
the BNP Paribas issue, suspension of redemptions from those three funds. That was the harbinger. That was the beginning of the crisis. Although the rest of the world didn't catch up to. I mean, the non-financial world didn't catch up until 2008. But August of 2008 was a very strange month. July of 2008 was full of problems with Freddie Mac, remember? Mm-hmm. And then it was like right around Labor Day, things just started feeling really weird in the capital markets, overnight repo that I follow closely. And of course, after Labor Day, everything went pear-shaped. And we're kind of in that August period when all the trading desks, all the B players are on the desks because the A players are on the beach. And that's true here in the United States. It's also very much true in Europe.
Oh, yeah, so 2-month vacations they take there.
Yeah, the stresses that are building now, you got to wonder if when people come back in early September, if we're going to see some issues materialize. That's what we're watching. I won't say afraid of. That's the wrong word.
And 2008 was also an election year.
An election year, yes, indeed. And, of course, the financial crisis in 2008, when the acute crisis that erupted in September of 2008 totally scrambled that election. I'm remembering, I'm sure you have vivid memories, too. I remember right after the Republican convention, Sarah Palin. It seemed like Barack Obama was running against Sarah Palin, right?
Yeah.
In those first couple of weeks of September, then the crisis shows up, and everything after that was scrambled.
Yep, very true. Very true. And we could be looking at something similar because now it looks like Obama's running against Ryan. I think Romney's on the ticket. I thought he was at the top, but he's like the Maytag repairman of this election. They just leave him alone. And Biden seems like he's entered a
Oh,
new dimension.
he's just off the leash. My goodness, the things he's saying.
Yeah, which says that he's
Indefensible things.
uncontrollable.
I mean, Frank,
Yeah.
you got. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kerry. You got to figure, no matter what party you are sympathetic to, or no matter who you're going to vote for, some of the stuff he's saying is nuts.
Oh, he's insane. I mean, I have thought for a long time that the guy, was a couple of sandwiches short of a picnic, and he's done nothing to disabuse us of that notion, has he?
Yeah. No, I mean, Biden is one of those guys. Bill Clinton in the same category, very different comparison, but natural politician.
Uh-huh.
I've seen this because I've been involved in political activities. My wife has as well. There are people. Anybody who's done retail politics has to know this. There are some guys, usually older guys. Sometimes they're good looking, sometimes they're not, but they just have a magnetic way with crowds. And Biden's like that. He's just a great politician, but a policymaker? No, I don't think so.
I don't know. I never understood the attraction of this guy because, to me, he just, he's always trying to make him. Well, I don't like to get into politics, but he's always trying to make you believe he's one of the middle class and, son of a truck driver and all that stuff. And the reality just seems to be so far different from
well, it's a shtick. I mean,
yeah.
A lot of politicians play that game. Romney is going to do that to some degree as well.
Yeah, how does he do it though? I mean, he's an elite. He's grew up as an elite, and he'll always be an elite. So how do you do that?
I think the answer, experience is showing, observation is showing the answer is not terribly well.
Yeah. So then he gets Ryan in there, who basically draws all the attention away from his deficiencies. And I don't think Ryan is the solution to anything myself, because, it's because you can't have incremental change with these entitlement programs. And anybody who says you could just change incrementally over time and everything is going to be okay is not being honest about it, because nothing.
And I think that I play this game over and over again in my head. And I just don't see the fiscal effects and the economic effects of the massive debt position we have in the United States. It's not clear, and that's just an honest statement. A lot of people with a lot of justification will tell you, well, the end point of that is hyperinflation. That's obvious, but it didn't happen in Japan, and it's not happening here. And so you got to wonder if, I'm by no way, the people on the other side who will say, oh, this is sustainable, we can do this forever, they're wrong too. But the problem is there's no historical experience to tell you how this is going to go. So it's very, very frightening. And when I look at things like the Ryan plan, I don't think any of that can be enacted without a major crisis. It's just, there's not going to be that immediately urgent financial market disorder. But if that does come, if that should happen sometime in the next 4 or 5 or 10 years, or in the next 2 months maybe,
you never know.
Then obviously something's going to happen. And what scares me about that, Kerry, is that we got a lot of really goofy policy responses in 2008. I think the most intelligent and useful ones were from the Federal Reserve, and that's a bigger subject. You may disagree with me. I'm sure some of your listeners do as well. But I will say, the Fed behaved very well under extreme crisis conditions, and the reason they did it is because they're the least accountable policy actor in Washington, so they had the most freedom of action, right? So what worries me is that in the next crisis, when so many things have changed with Dodd-Frank, TARP will not be possible, nothing like it. Yeah. So the Fed is going to have to improvise, and who knows how that's going to go.
But
very, very uncertain.
There's the argument that all they succeeded in doing in the last fiscal crisis was kicking the can down the road. And
that's true.
They haven't solved anything.
No doubt about that.
So maybe it's preferable to an immediate disaster to have them kick the can down the road, but it doesn't really solve anything. I mean, you can't deny that.
Let me tell you what worries me the most. I mean, we're looking closely at the situation in Europe. Okay, and you started the show by asking the question: is September 2012 like September 2008. The most vivid, immediate thing that is different is that the data is not there. Okay, I was telling people in the spring of '07 that something whack was happening in the capital markets. By June of '07, we knew something was very wrong. '07, not '08.
Yeah.
June of '07, we knew things were wrong with Bear Stearns. August of '07, the crisis starts. And the fourth quarter of '07 was a plus 4% GDP year. People were telling me, you're absolutely nuts. We're not even in a recession.
Yeah.
So, and then '08 happens. But there were a lot of signals. The capital markets were throwing off a lot of signs of disorder and stress. And
Which they're doing
the
now,
signs were there to read. That's not happening now.
You
Why?
don't think,
Because the Fed and because the ECB have put so much liquidity into the system. It's like morphine. Right? If there's going to be a crisis, it'll happen. It'll come out of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think there's signs coming, though. I think we're seeing it. These 0% interest rates, ZIRP, is really one of the symptoms of it because nobody is borrowing money. So I don't know if that's
There's no justification for taking a risk.
Exactly.
There's no incremental returns to risk. So what everybody does is they invest risk-free, and then there's a very large class of investors, namely U.S. banks, that have no choice but to invest risk-free because, strictly speaking, they're undercapitalized, and the only reason they aren't getting shut down is because that's going to cost the government too much, so they all pretend.
Yeah.
And what that means is the only thing you're allowed to invest in is Treasury debt because you don't have to reserve capital against it, right?
Yeah.
And that's what the government wants anyway because they need to sell that stuff at low interest rates.
Yeah, which is sucking the life out of the economy, right?
Thank you.
I mean,
couldn't agree more.
Nobody can deny
it's a
that.
disaster.
Yeah. So what are we really accomplishing by kicking the can down the road?
Here's what you're accomplishing, and I think if it were possible to give Ben Bernanke truth serum, he would say this. All right.
Yeah.
And the answer is that we are buying financial stability. In other words, we're buying the absence of widespread bank failures at the price of economic stagnation. And Europe is making exactly the same trade. They're doing it almost explicitly. They're almost being honest about it.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that it can't go on that way because there's a limit to how much money can be printed, and there's a limit to how much extend and pretend, and the way we're suffering here also is that that there's no more markets. There's just these interventions taking place by the federal government, and how does that help us?
Yeah, it's well, is it sustainable? I think Carmen Reinhardt. She wrote she was co-author of the book This Time Is Different with Ken Rogoff. She talks about financial repression, which is policy by monetary policymakers, monetary authorities, in which they will maintain, basically keeping the economy at the edge of deflation.
Right.
Right. And that is a way of keeping everything from going unstable. And it is an explicit policy of transferring real wealth from savers and investors to the stakeholders of banks, of financial institutions. Because the financial institutions, they're, in a proper world, I don't know if you want to say it that way, in a different kind of world, they would be failing. They would be paying for the mistakes that they made, the bad investments, et cetera, et cetera. They're not, because policymakers are explicitly saying that's worse than, we don't want that kind of outcome, especially since we'll get blamed for it as policymakers, right? And Congress will get thrown out of office, blah, blah, blah. They don't want that. So the trade they're making is they're keeping the economy at the edge of deflation, the effect of there being no zero interest rates, right? No risk-adjusted rates of return readily available in the economy. There's no way for your grandmother to buy a bank CD and earn a rate of return, a real rate of return, right?
Sure.
So the net effect of that is that we're transferring wealth and slowly over time recapitalizing the banks, and frankly, I think it's terrible because they don't deserve it. But that's kind of the answer to your question. That's how long it's going to take. However long it lasts, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, for the large incumbent U.S. banks to come back to a reasonable capital position, that's how long it's going to take.
I don't know. With these derivatives, we could be one sneeze away from a global collapse, and there won't be anything that can
and we don't
stop
know that.
it. Yeah, one of these
Don't
too
know
big
that.
to fails. That's end game. And it's not just in the U.S., these too big to fails. They're all over the world. And that's really the problem, is that nobody knows how bad the system is, how precariously perched it is, except for the insiders and probably the Fed. But they're not talking about it. And we could be a lot closer to that mega collapse than we were even in 2008. And that's the scary part, is nobody's telling us the truth. So anyway, Francis, we got to wrap up, but as always, thought-provoking, and you make people think, which is why we love to have you on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. And if you want to hear this interview as well as others Francis and other financial luminaries around the world have done, just check us out there. Francis, if people want to find out more about you and check out your writing, you've got a few places they can go.
Well, they're welcome to go to redstate.com. I also do, these days I do less writing and more speaking. I do a podcast twice a week called Coffee and Markets, and your listeners are invited to check it out if they have an interest.
Excellent. And I've checked it out myself. I enjoy it, although I think I'm a better interviewer than him, but we can talk about that. No, but seriously, I think
you're a great interviewer, Kerry. I'd love to be on with you.
It's a good podcast. I try to listen to everything that I can, but when you're doing it, it gets harder and harder to listen to other stuff because, I mean, it isn't like I just go on the phone and then I'm off. It's a process throughout the day where I'm doing this whether I'm on or not. It's strange to explain, but hey, I really appreciate you coming on, especially the fact you're a New Yorker, and we just have a different outlook towards things, I think, than others.
A different geographical viewpoint on the world.
Well, we're much more pragmatic because, you can get from 42nd Street and Broadway down to the Battery 15 different ways, but we're always looking for the best way to go with the least hassle, the most direct route, but not necessarily the most direct, but the fastest. And, we think about those things. And I don't think the rest of the country really thinks about getting from point A to point B the way that New Yorkers do. That's what differentiates us.
What I want to do is, from a high point at Times Square and Broadway, what I want to do, 42nd Street Broadway, what I want to do is I want to get onto that X-51 Wave Rider.
Oh, yeah.
The hypersonic airplane, and I want to be at Battery Park in about 15 milliseconds. That's what I want.
I want to be there before I left.
There you go.
Before I even thought I wanted to go there, I want to be there.
Let's violate some laws of physics while we're at it. That's always fun,
what
too.
the heck? We could dream. So anyway, hey, we'll talk to you again after the summer break, and enjoy the rest of it because things are
They're
going to be heating up. So you be well.
All right, you too.